Good morning, I'm Annita McVeigh, live at Westminster on another dramatic day here. The headlines at 9. A Conservative MP warns the Prime Minister has a matter of hours to get a grip after chaotic scenes in the Commons last night. Ministers were accused of using physical force on some Conservative MPs, and there were rumours the Chief Whip had quit hours after the Home Secretary resigned.
And I've said to a number of colleagues it's never acceptable for there to be any harassment of members as they cast their democratic vote. So I hope that any who were will be duly disciplined.
I hope all those people that put Liz Truss in number 10, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it for the ministerial red box. I hope it was worth it to sit round the cabinet table, because the damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
I'm Martine Croxall. Our other headlines this morning. The full findings of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse will be published later today after a 7-year investigation. Ukrainians are told to prepare for power cuts after Russian attacks on the country's energy infrastructure intensify. A warning that the decline of traditional GP-patient relationships are putting patient safety at risk.
For our continuing coverage of the extraordinary scenes we've seen here over the last few days. You might think extraordinary doesn't even cover it. Welcome to viewers both in the UK and around the world. Well, Liz Truss's premiership is under even more pressure today after extraordinary scenes at Westminster last night, during which ministers were accused of using physical force on Conservative MPs to make sure they voted with the government. Amid confusion over whether a vote on fracking was a confidence vote, there were reports the Chief Whip and her deputy had quit. Downing Street later said that both were still in their jobs and that a minister said he'd seen no evidence of anyone being manhandled. Well, today the Conservative MP Simon Hoare has told the BBC that the Prime Minister has just a matter of hours to turn around her premiership. The latest round of turmoil began yesterday afternoon with the resignation of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, one of the key officers in the government. She admitted a technical infringement of the rules over an email. But her resignation letter set out stinging criticism of the Liz Truss government. Grant Shapps, who just a matter of weeks ago had been sacked by Liz Truss, was then made new Home Secretary. And there's fury among Conservative MPs over the way ministers handled that fracking vote. They were first told the vote was a test of confidence in the Prime Minister, then told in the Commons that it wasn't. In the early hours of today, the government changed its position again, saying it was a confidence vote all along, and the Tory MPs who didn't vote for fracking would be punished. Well, what is clear this morning is that backbenchers are very angry. Let's first hear those comments from Simon Hoare, who's the Conservative MP for North Dorset, who said Liz Truss has hours to sort things out.
One can't say hand on heart today that there is a, if this was a career review, an employer sitting in front of a person looking at performance and outcomes, etc., then the score sheet isn't looking very good. But I'm a glass half full sort of person. Can the ship be turned around? Yes, but I think there's about 12 hours to do it. I mean, I think this is. I think today, tomorrow are crunch days. I have never known. Okay, I've only been an MP for 7 years, but a growing sense of pessimism in all wings of the Tory party. Usually it's one or the other, but to have it across the party should be ringing alarm bells in both number 10 and in number 11.
Simon Hoare MP. Well, another Conservative MP, Crispin Blunt, spoke to the Today programme on Radio 4 a little earlier and castigated the Prime Minister.
Wholly untenable. And if she doesn't understand that, then I would be astonished. But one of the qualities she has shown is a lack of self-knowledge to this whole process, because it ought to have been clear that she did not have the capacity to lead our party, and I don't think she should have put herself up for the leadership in the first place. All of that has now been confirmed. It's plain what is required. We need to effect a change, frankly, today in order to stop this shambles and give our country the governance it needs under our constitution.
Well, earlier the Transport Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan was asked if she was proud to be a member of the government.
So I'm very proud to be the Secretary of State for Transport, delivering really important policies and indeed day-to-day services for our constituents across the country. I think yesterday's sad seeming images from the lobbies are ones that I know the business managers will look into today. And I've said to a number of colleagues it's never acceptable for there to be any harassment of members as they cast their democratic vote. So I hope that any who will be duly disciplined. I know Mr. Speaker will take it very seriously, and I will leave it to him to determine what's what. I think what's really important is to focus on what we are doing in a really difficult global environment at the moment.
Let's get more on all of this now with our chief political correspondent, Nick Eardley, who's at Downing Street. Nick, hello to you. As I said a few minutes ago, extraordinary probably doesn't cut it, does it, when it comes to describing the events of yesterday here at Westminster? What might today bring?
Well, look, I mean, the government is waking up to chaos, quite frankly, Anita. All that confusion yesterday, the resignation of the Home Secretary and that excoriating letter criticising the Prime Minister's actions in government, her policy, suggesting she might have to resign. Then there's the big row coming today about exactly what punishment is handed out to those MPs who failed to back the government in a vote last night. And you can see already this morning a trickle of MPs coming out and saying that the Prime Minister needs to go. And those comments that we just heard from Simon Hoare on Radio 4 this morning were really quite something. To say that within the next 12 hours the Prime Minister needs to turn this around. Let's be clear what he's suggesting, that the Prime Minister could have hit the end of the road by today. Now, there's a couple of things to bear in mind. We've talked about them already this week, Anita, but they're really important. One is, it's not clear what would come next. Another is, it's not clear what the mechanism Tory MPs would use to get rid of the Prime Minister is. And I think both of those things act as a big caveat to the chaos. Yes, Liz Truss is facing unprecedented pressure, but it's not guaranteed that Tory MPs will find a way to boot her out. She's going to spend the day speaking to some of them here in Downing Street, in Parliament as well. We'll have to see how it goes. Within the last few minutes, the Chief Whip has just arrived here, Wendy Morton. We weren't sure last night if she'd resigned. A lot of Tory MPs thought she had. In the end, she's still here. She has a lot of questions to answer, the Chief Whip, as does the Prime Minister, about who's in charge and whether they still have control.
Yeah, and on that issue of control, we were told early yesterday that the fracking vote was a confidence vote in the Prime Minister. Then later on, we understood that it wasn't a confidence vote, and then in the early hours of today, Downing Street let it be known that it was a confidence vote after all. Now, presumably those MPs who are in line to be disciplined for not voting with the government, they're really furious that they are potentially going to be penalised, even though the communication to them seems to have been very unclear.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that's spot on. Tory MPs were told it was definitely a confidence vote. A minister then told them in Parliament that it wasn't a confidence vote. The explanation I've had for that is that Downing Street mistakenly told that minister he could say it. But then there was all the chaos in the voting lobbies, various MPs being pressured to voting with the government, lots of accusations of manhandling and bullying, accusations denied by the ministers they've been levelled at. And then 1:30 this morning, a message goes through to political journalists like me, Anita, saying Conservative MPs were fully aware that the vote was subject to a three-line whip. Basically means they had to be there. The whips will now be speaking to Conservative MPs who failed to support the government. Those without a reasonable excuse for failing to vote with the government can expect proportionate disciplinary action. We've asked the question, we don't know what that means yet in terms of what's going to be proportionate. But you can imagine the situation if you're a Tory MP who was against fracking, signed up to a manifesto that said no to fracking, was then told to vote with the government on fracking, didn't vote with the government on fracking because you didn't think it was a confidence issue basically about whether the government should stay in power. Now you're told it was and you're going to be disciplined. Can't imagine that will do much at all to help the mood in the Conservative Party.
And there's a broader point here, isn't there, Nick? This government was supposed to be a fresh start for the Conservatives after the controversy that surrounded much of Boris Johnson's time in office, certainly his last months in office. But if anything, it's even more chaotic. And lots of people are asking, including within the Conservative Party themselves, is the party simply too busy fighting with itself, too ill at ease with itself, to actually be an effective government for the public at a time of economic crisis?
I think that's a very valid question. The big question that's been asked for a few weeks now actually is whether the Conservative Party is so divided that there's just no leader that it can choose who would be able to govern properly. So Liz Truss was brought in after, I'm just going to get out of the way and let you see whoever's arriving here in Downing Street. Very fast. Cars do not normally approach at that sort of speed. Is it all over, Chairman? It's the Jake Berry, the Conservative Party chairman, arriving to join the Chief Whip, a man who's got to tell the Prime Minister what the mood in the party is this morning. But yes, look, I mean, it's completely divided, Anita, and there was a sort of battle for the soul of the Conservative Party over the summer. Rishi Sunak said we've got to be careful about spending. Liz Truss said we'll borrow to cut taxes. That didn't go well. She's now sort of moved back to Rishi Sunak's position, but the people who backed her don't want Rishi Sunak supporters to be in control. Well, what have we seen over the last couple of days? Jeremy Hunt is now the Chancellor. Grant Shapps, who also backed Rishi Sunak, is now the Home Secretary. So that suggests she's trying to bring in the centre of the party to her top team, but I think that could alienate some on the right. And Suella Braverman, who is on the right of the party, has made it clear she's unhappy. Lord Frost, another darling of the Tory right, has called for the Prime Minister to quit in a Telegraph article this morning. So that just suggests there's more trouble ahead for the Prime Minister from all wings of the party. None of it at all paints anything other than a picture that's going to make it extraordinarily hard for Liz Truss to soldier on, never mind rebuild her authority and credibility.
Nick, thank you very much. Nick Eardley, our chief political correspondent there in Downing Street for us. Let's get a little bit more on the situation now with our political correspondent, Ione Wells.
Is this a coalition of chaos, Mr. Shapps?
Another day, another new cabinet minister. Grant Shapps, sacked just 6 weeks ago by Liz Truss, returns as her new Home Secretary.
Look, obviously it's been turbulent time for the government, but I think the most important thing is to make sure that people in this country know that they've got security. And that's why it's a great honour to be appointed as Home Secretary.
He stepped up after Suella Braverman stepped down, resigning over 2 data breaches. But have a look at her resignation letter. She wrote to the Prime Minister, pretending we haven't made mistakes, carrying on as if everyone can't see that we have made them, and hoping that things will magically come right is not serious politics. I have made a mistake. I accept responsibility. I resign. She was hinting at what some Conservative MPs were saying privately and publicly last night here in Westminster, that the government has lost its authority and that they think Liz Truss should go. Another source of tension last night was a vote in Parliament, tabled by Labour, about whether MPs should get a say on the government's plans to bring back fracking. Downing Street told Tory MPs the vote would be considered a vote of confidence in the government itself, and if they didn't oppose it and back the government, they would face being kicked out of the parliamentary party. In the voting lobbies, there was confusion, with some MPs not sure of the consequences of their vote. Here was the damning assessment from one veteran Tory MP.
I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling
So you seem quietly
I'm livid. And, you know, I really shouldn't say this, but I hope all those people that put Liz Truss in number 10, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it for the ministerial red box. I hope it was worth it to sit round the cabinet table, because the damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
And then came this allegation from a Labour MP.
I saw members being physically manhandled into another lobby and being bullied.
Is there a chief whip?
All the chaos and confusion here fueled questions among MPs about whether the government's chief and deputy chief whips in charge of party discipline had resigned. And at one stage, even their government colleagues did not know the answer.
I'm not entirely clear on what the situation is with the chief whip. There has been an element of confusion over whether the vote was a confidence vote or not.
There was a great victory today. Chief whip, great credit to her.
Were she manhandled into the voting lobbies?
Chief whip did a great job today.
They both remain in post, seemingly with the backing of the Deputy Prime Minister, who was on her way to a gathering of senior Conservatives at a private members' club. But it's the Prime Minister's position that is looking increasingly vulnerable today, with some Tory MPs confirming they have sent letters of no confidence in Liz Truss to Sir Graham Brady, who runs the committee of backbench Tory MPs.
How many letters have been sent in, sir?
All this just 6 weeks into her premiership. Her fate now depends on what her own MPs here in Westminster decide to do next. Ione Wells, BBC News.
Well, I'm joined here now at Westminster by Caroline Slowcock. She's a Director of Civil Change, first woman Private Secretary at number 10, and was a Private Secretary to Margaret Thatcher. She also worked for many years at the Treasury, and indeed you were in the room with Margaret Thatcher when she resigned, and much has been made of how Liz Truss, in photo opportunities and on other occasions, has appeared to model herself on Margaret Thatcher. Yesterday at PMQs, Liz Truss said she was a fighter, not a quitter, and you were reflecting on social media last night that that had echoes of something Margaret Thatcher said.
Yes, I mean, she was inside number 10, talking about whether she should go or not, and then she came outside to the assembled media and said, "I fight on. I fight to win." That was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The next morning, she resigned. I think politicians want to put a tough face on things, but I'm sure that behind those doors, there's some very difficult conversations going on.
Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, you were in the room with Margaret Thatcher when she was making that decision, when she resigned. Give us a sense of what it's like for somebody in that position to be the Prime Minister, not wanting to go, not wanting to leave the job, which clearly Liz Truss does not want to do. She's not even been in the job for 2 months. What's it like for a person in that moment?
I think it is an extraordinarily difficult adjustment that has to be made, because you have power, you believe you deserve it. Certainly Margaret Thatcher did. And you want to hold on to it, and it's about coming to terms with a different reality. And I think for Liz Truss that's especially difficult, because as Michael Gove put it during the leadership campaign, she's been on holiday from reality, and now reality is crashing in on her. And it's a very personal, painful process that someone has to go through to realise that they've got to step down. And 6 weeks into a job, I think it's especially difficult. You want to keep running, but reality is running back at you, and you're going to hit a brick wall.
Yes, so there comes a point when the decision is taken out of your hands.
Yeah, it's a matter ultimately of politics. If you haven't got the trust of your party, then you just can't go on. That's the way our system works.
Do you see any way in which Liz Truss gets through this and continues as PM?
Well, no, but also I hope not, because I think that her judgment is so poor that there's so many difficult decisions ahead that she could get wrong. I think for the sake of the country, she should go. But I just don't think
even though she's admitted making mistakes and said that she was putting, well, first Jeremy Hunt and now other people in place that she thinks are the right people to surround herself with to make the right decisions.
Well, really, this is a question of integrity, isn't it? If you've made a mistake of that magnitude, crashing the economy and now crashing, the Tory party, it's not good enough to just say sorry. To show leadership, to show integrity, you actually have to admit, you have to take responsibility. And I think, when Thatcher resigned, she didn't face she hadn't caused a crisis of this magnitude. So why hasn't Liz Truss resigned? We remember, I mean, it's hard to remember because so much time seems to have passed, but it's actually so little. Boris Johnson resigned because of lack of integrity and also because of lack of competence. And here we've got another Prime Minister in exactly the same situation. She's not facing up to her responsibilities and she's not to be trusted.
What do you think this says about the Conservative Party at the moment, about the way it elects its leaders, the procedures, and whether it's what people need? I mean, people clearly don't need chaos, do they, in government? So big questions for the Conservatives about whether they can sort this out and really turn course to deliver what people need.
I think they're somewhat at the end of the road. When you've got a Prime Minister who's dressing up as Margaret Thatcher, literally and metaphorically, somebody who was in power 30 years ago, who hasn't got ideas really of her own, you've got a problem. But also it's about focusing on what government is for. Government is not to stay in power, it's to be there, for the people. And the decisions that have been made in recent times have been catastrophic for the people and for the economy. So they need to get a process that actually works for the people.
But there are clearly people within the party who could do that job. I mean, Charles Walker was saying in his interview last night, wasn't he? Clearly, he said he was livid. That was the word he used about the situation. And he talked about the talentless people in the party who were making decisions. The Conservative Party clearly has people who could make those decisions, but they're not necessarily around the cabinet table, are they?
No, and I think the obvious choice is Rishi Sunak. He warned that this would happen for the economy if Liz Truss pursued her policies. So I think there are people out there that could be put in place, but it's also true that they have reduced the gene pool. Remember that Boris Johnson ousted a lot of his party, his MPs, because they wouldn't back him on Brexit. So they've lost a lot of talent in the Conservative Party. They are running a bit thin, but there are certainly more grown-up, competent people out there than the current Prime Minister.
Does she deserve more time? It's been, 42, 43, I think, days. It's very early days. Obviously, she was Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss was Foreign Secretary before she became Prime Minister and has held other cabinet roles. Does she deserve more time?
No.
Need more time to get it right?
No, because what's actually been revealed is that her judgment is just so disastrously poor. The decisions that she took around the budget, the decisions that she took in her leadership contest as the course that she wanted to follow, was not just a poor set of decisions, but they actually have wreaked havoc on the economy. She called herself the human hand grenade. She's blown up the economy. She's blowing up her party, and if she's not careful, she's blowing up faith in politics altogether.
Yeah, what difference do you think this makes reputationally to the party, to the UK system of democracy and to Parliament?
I think it's very damaging. I was seeing, a couple of women who are pensioners on the television last night, and that somebody said to them, you're glad that your pension is going to be uprated and in line with inflation. They said, well, that's just what's being said today. What will be said tomorrow? This is very damaging to our political system. And actually, we do need to restore trust in politics. It was a problem that highlighted by Johnson. It's now a problem that's made worse by Liz Truss. We need to have a system that people can have faith in, will actually deliver, the things which they expect in their lives, stability and good government. And, we're just going from bad to worse.
OK, Caroline Slowcock, thank you very much, former Private Secretary to Margaret Thatcher and indeed to John Major. Well, we can speak now to Elliot Wilson, Conservative commentator and a former clerk of the House of Commons. Elliot, thank you very much for joining us today on BBC News and BBC World. What's your take on where we are at today?
Well, I think we're in very difficult times, to put it mildly. I think there are two things going on simultaneously which make it more difficult. Clearly, there are ideological differences within the Conservative Party, which the fiscal statement that Kwasi Kwarteng unveiled kind of revealed. But I think also there's a problem with a perceived and actual lack of grip on behalf of the Prime Minister. She doesn't seem now to be able to get anything right, briefly. And I think that's a real issue, because once you get into the stage of succumbing to unforced errors, it does start to look as if there's an end coming very quickly. And I think those two combinations, the combination of the ideological and the sheer practical, are going to make things very difficult.
And was the confusion over the fracking vote, does that fall into the category of unforced errors, in your opinion?
I think it must do. I mean, let's be very clear. The vote was about 5% about fracking and about 95% about the opposition trying to take control of the order paper later in the month. And that was something that the government clearly couldn't accept. And so making it a confidence vote was a relatively rational thing to do. But I think, however it happened, the fact that the minister at the dispatch box, Graham Stewart, was saying later in the debate that actually it wasn't a confidence vote at all, however that happened, was a catastrophic mistake. And I think MPs are right to be upset by being misled or at least confused by that. Clearly, we need to know how that happened, and there needs to be some severe discipline in Downing Street. But yes, that was a completely unforced error. It should have been very clear from yesterday morning what was going to happen and what the consequences would be. And for that to be thrown into confusion was unacceptable.
So we have one MP today saying that the Prime Minister has got 12 hours to turn this around. Some MP saying she doesn't even have that in their view, that she should be going. But as we've been discussing, there's no obvious or agreed successor. And also, what would be the procedure around trying to remove a Prime Minister who only took up the job less than 2 months ago? So with your former hat on as a clerk of the House of Commons, what would the procedure be?
Well, I think there is a degree of flexibility. I mean, we need to remember that there is a lot of latitude given to the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. He has already met with the Prime Minister this week and is meeting with his executive today. I think if he were to say to the Prime Minister in private that her position was untenable, he would have a great deal of influence and perhaps an ability to persuade her that the game was up. The question then is what happens. Clearly there are 2, maybe 3 potential candidates to replace the Prime Minister, but I think what the party would like in an ideal world is to have a sort of coronation in the same way that Michael Howard had in 2003 when he replaced Ian Duncan Smith, so that they don't have another leadership contest with all the divisiveness which goes around that. But I think getting the parliamentary party to agree to a single candidate is very difficult. It would be ideal if they would recognise collectively the gravity of the situation, and that their minds would be focused then on the need to hand over very quickly to a single, competent, trusted, able candidate. But I'm not sure quite how that's going to happen.
Sorry, Elliot, I was just struggling slightly to hear the end of your thought with the sirens going past in the background. But you were talking about the idea of a coronation, because not to jump too far ahead in this process, and as we've seen, a lot changes, a lot moves within 24 hours at the moment. But I mean, the Conservatives, if they are deciding that is what needs to happen, they can't afford to basically mess this up, can they? Because then they would be on to a third Prime Minister within a year, and they would want someone who enjoyed support and credibility right across the party, but it's a party that's very divided.
There are ideological divisions within the party, but I think there's more an overwhelming sense that this is the sort of last chance saloon to pull the party together and have even a fighting chance of surviving the next election, let alone winning it. I think, as you say, that there needs to be a single candidate to do that, and I think that that's going to be quite difficult to achieve as the party stands at the moment. But I think if minds are focused, and if perhaps senior members of the government and on the backbenches can rally behind a single candidate and perhaps put their own ambitions to one side, as did happen, as I said, in 2003 when Michael Howard became leader, then I think there is a possibility of that happening. But it's going to be difficult.
Does the public deserve what's going on at the moment? Is this acceptable during a cost of living crisis?
Oh, I don't know about what the public deserves or doesn't deserve. To be honest, no, it's not acceptable. I mean, there are serious challenges facing the UK, both at home and abroad. And I think to have a government of the sort we have at the moment, which for whatever reason seems bedeviled by, at best, appalling luck, is not good enough. I think if there were something Liz Truss could do to turn the whole thing around and somehow get a grip, then I think a lot of people would welcome it. But it's difficult to see now how she achieves that. And so I think the best we can hope for is a new Prime Minister who can gather the party together, steady the ship, put a brave face on it and deliver some competence and leadership.
OK, Elliot Wilson, thank you very much for your thoughts today, Conservative commentator, former clerk at the House of Commons. And we're just getting a clip in a brief interview done with Kemi Badenoch, the Secretary of State for International Trade. Let's hear what she has to say today.
Morning, Ms. Badenoch, BBC News.
Good morning.
Are you planning to resign?
No.
Is the government fully functioning at the moment?
Well, it's quite clear that there's quite a lot of turmoil in the party, but what we all need to do is keep calm heads and work to resolve it, and I'm confident that we can do that.
Do you think Liz Truss goes today?
Thank you very much.
Have you got support for her to stand instead of her?
So Kemi Badenoch, there, Secretary of State for International Trade, acknowledging that there is turmoil, but calling for calm heads. Let me just also tell you that we're hearing that Labour has been granted an urgent question. We believe that's going to happen in an hour's time. And that urgent question is to ask the new Home Secretary, as of yesterday afternoon, Grant Shapps, about the departure of his predecessor, Suella Braverman, who stepped down yesterday over a technical breach regarding the sending of an email. So Labour granted an urgent question in an hour's time here at the House of Commons to ask the new Home Secretary, Grant Shapps, about the departure of his predecessor, Suella Braverman. We will be back here very, very soon, but for the moment, over to Martine in the studio.
Annita, thank you very much. Just a pivot, really, for the moment. Sport, full roundup from the BBC Sports Centre. Mike Bushell. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Martine. Thanks very much indeed. Well, now, first of all, to one of Manchester United's best performances of the season, but at the end, their biggest name was rather conspicuous by his absence. So United fold from the subs bench and didn't get to play any part at all, and so with just a few minutes to go, decided to...
I don't pay attention today. We deal with that tomorrow. And I want to get the focus on this team. It was a magnificent performance from all the 11 players.
He's a massive talent. He's only 22. He's coming from, from Portugal, but he was not there for long. So not too long ago he was in Uruguay. So it's just he's a real big talent, and we are really excited about it.
Now just one next to the Scottish League Cup, and Celtic will play Kilmarnock in the last four. After thrashing Motherwell 4-0 at Fir Park, Leo Labada's double sending the defending champions into the semi-finals. A competition they have won 6 times in the last 8 seasons. While Rangers will meet Aberdeen in the last 4 after beating Dundee 1-0. Stephen Davis scored the goal after 9 minutes, while Aberdeen knocked out Partick Thistle. But performance of the night must go to Arsenal's women in France, thrashing the Champions League holders Lyon 5-1 in the opening game of their group stage. Yeah, the victory was rounded off by England's Beth Mead, the runner-up this week in the Ballon d'Or. She scored twice in this brilliant result for the Gunners. Caitlin Ford also got a couple. Now, Sri Lanka have booked their spot in cricket's T20 World Cup Super 12s with a 16-run victory over the Netherlands. Opener Kusal Mendis struck 79 from 44 balls to set the Dutch side a target of 163 to win. Max O'Dowd's entertaining 71 not out from 53 balls kept Netherlands in the game throughout their innings, but Lahiru Kumara expertly defended 23 from the final over to secure their victory for Sri Lanka. They've won their last 2 games on the bounce to secure qualification. In the other game of the group between UAE and Namibia, which has just got underway, the UAE chose to bat first and are currently 41 for 1. England bowler Jofra Archer will join the Lions tour in the UAE next month as he continues his comeback from injury.
Online safety bill imminently, ensuring that social media platforms finally prioritise protecting children, remove abhorrent illegal content quickly, including hate crimes, and that they keep their promises to their own users.
Mr. Speaker, online hate speech affects all and aims to sow division. Yet the government is making painfully slow progress in making online spaces less toxic. Home Office figures reveal a sharp increase in far-right activity, with Muslim and Jewish communities facing the highest number of the hate crimes in the UK year after year. I, along with other parliamentary colleagues, suffer online abuse on a regular basis. So what steps will the Minister take to tackle Islamophobia and anti-Semitism online?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The crimes that the Honourable Member references, including hate crimes, are not acceptable on any platform. As I've already said, we will bring back the online safety bill imminently. I cannot announce House business here today, but I can assure all members that the bill will be coming back very shortly. I share his concerns, as I'm sure everybody in the House does.
Chair of the Select Committee, Julian Knight.
Morning, Mr. Speaker. May I first welcome the Secretary of State to her place and the refreshing degree of engagement that is now underway with the Select Committee. I also welcome the comments of the Secretary of State that she'll be strengthening the online safety bill's protection for children. However, there has been speculation following previous comments that she'll be reviewing the duties of care for adults related to so-called legal but harmful content. As such, can she clarify what changes she is minded to make over legal but harmful content?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will be coming back to the House with this in due course, and the bill will be coming back imminently. This is my key priority. I cannot stress that enough. Protecting children should be the fundamental responsibility of this House, and we will strengthen the provisions for children. I've made that assurance.
Well, just to explain what's happening here, we were expecting a statement from the Speaker on the events of last night, that fracking vote, which caused lots of confusion, many Conservative MPs expressing their anger about how this was handled. We were told early yesterday that this vote was a confidence vote, effectively, in the government, on the Prime Minister. Later on, Conservative MPs were told it wasn't a confidence vote, and then in the early hours of this morning we were told that in fact it was a confidence vote after all, and that Conservative MPs, more than 30 of them, who hadn't voted for the government would be subject to disciplinary proceedings. Now that's been greeted by a number of Conservative MPs with fury, 7 now openly saying that they want the Prime Minister to go. Gary Streeter MP, now the 7th of those MPs, openly calling for Liz Truss to go. Others saying that she's got a matter of hours to try to turn the situation around. And of course the 1922 committee will be looking at this situation very closely. Charles Walker, the MP, said in an interview last night that he was sure that the 1922 committee would deal with this situation. And Charles Walker earlier in the evening had given an interview to the BBC. He's already called for Liz Truss to resign. Here's what he had to say yesterday evening.
To be perfectly honest, this whole affair is inexcusable. It is a pitiful reflection on the Conservative Parliamentary Party at every level. And it reflects really badly, obviously, on the government of the day.
Do you think there's any coming back from this?
I don't think so. But I haven't. I have to say I've been of that view really since two weeks ago. This is an absolute disgrace. As a Tory MP of 17 years, who's never been a minister, who's got on with it loyally most of the time, I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling.
So you seem quietly...
I'm livid. And, you know, I really shouldn't say this, but I hope all those people that put Liz Truss in number 10, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it for the ministerial red box. I hope it was worth it to sit round the cabinet table, because the damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
I'm sorry, it's very difficult to convey. You look just furious about this?
I am. I've had enough. I've had enough of talentless people putting their tick in the right box, not because it's in the national interest, but because it's in their own personal interest to achieve ministerial position. And I know I speak for hundreds of backbenchers who right now are worrying for their constituents all the time, but now worrying about their own personal circumstances, because there is nothing as an ex-MP. And a lot of my colleagues are wondering, as many of their constituents are wondering, how they're going to pay their mortgages if this all comes to an end soon.
What do you do next? How do you move on from this?
Well, I'm leaving Parliament at the next general election, and I'm leaving voluntarily. But unless we get our act together and behave like grown-ups, I'm afraid many hundreds of my colleagues, perhaps 200, will be leaving at the behest of their electorate. So that's really pretty much all I've got to say. Patience reached the limit.
And that was Charles Walker MP saying last night that he was livid with the situation in the government of which he is a part. One of those MPs, 7 of them now, who are openly calling on Liz Truss to step down is Gary Streeter, the Conservative MP for South West Devon. And he's been tweeting today, a pretty extraordinary tweet which sort of encapsulates the feeling of many MPs, many Conservative MPs. He says, sadly, it seems we must change leader. But, he writes, even if the angel Gabriel now takes over, the parliamentary party has to urgently rediscover discipline, mutual respect and teamwork if we are to, 1, govern the UK well, and 2, avoid slaughter at the next election. And he uses the hashtag last chance. And that is a view that is increasingly being expressed by Conservative MPs. Well, today's front pages are unsurprisingly dominated with the ongoing saga here in Westminster. The Sun puts it succinctly with the word broken, coupled with an image of the Prime Minister. Chaos at the heart of Westminster is the Eyes headline. The Metro leads on Suellava mess. Suellava mess. Sorry, just reading that for the first time. Suellava mess, that's what it says. After the dramatic resignation of the Home Secretary with just 43 days in the job. The Guardian says the resignation puts the Truss premiership on the brink again. And the Times reports on what it says is the total breakdown of party unity and discipline. This is the front page of the Daily Telegraph. It says the cabinet resignation of Suella Braverman has rocked the government, and quotes from the Home Secretary's resignation letter in which he accused the government of breaking key pledges. And this is the headline on the front page of the Mirror. Utter chaos, it says. Let me just bring in some news. We're told that the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has said he has asked the Sergeant at Arms and other officials to investigate allegations made about incidents in the Commons last night. Now, this surrounds that fracking vote. A number of Labour MPs and others said that they had seen Conservative MPs being manhandled. The word bullying was used as well, as MPs decided about whether they were going to go in and vote in support of the government. So Sir Lindsay Hoyle said he has asked the Sergeant at Arms and other officials to investigate allegations made about incidents in the Commons on Wednesday night, those accusations of bullying and indeed of manhandling. MPs absolutely rejected by the Conservative Party, I should say. In a statement to MPs, Sir Lindsay Hoyle said, "I remind members that the behaviour code applies to them as well as to other members of our parliamentary community." Well, the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, appeared on BBC Breakfast earlier on, and he's been reflecting on the scenes in Parliament last night.
I think people have seen on the screens the degree of chaos in Parliament, the extent to which stable government has broken down. And even at the height of some of the biggest political dramas, I've been in Parliament since 2015, haven't quite seen the kind of scenes we saw last night of MPs being shoved into the voting lobbies, Conservative MPs breaking down in tears in the toilets. It's a mess. And the point is, because actually I don't think the central issue here is who has what job or how stressful Conservative MPs are finding things. It's the consequences of this chaos for families across the country.
Well, with me here still is Caroline Slowcock, former Private Secretary Margaret Thatcher, and John Major, the first woman to hold the post. She also worked for many years at the Treasury. That was an extraordinary tweet, wasn't it, from the MP Gary Streeter saying, you know, even if the angel Gabriel took over, discipline has to be restored if the party is to govern effectively and to even stand a chance at the next election. And I'm not sure that many people would disagree with that analysis. What did you think of that tweet?
I think he's, you know, it's a good point that it's going to be very hard to restore discipline, but I think if they can get someone in place who can bring in a broad team across the talents of the party, then I think things would be massively calmed. I think actually the most important thing is for them to get, you know, some ideas and an agenda that will actually work. The problem with this Truss is that you've pursued an agenda which really just wasn't going to ever work and is sort of, you know, out-of-date ideas ineffectively implemented. So I think, you know, I think this is a terrible moment. I think some recovery can be made for the Conservative Party, but I think, frankly, we are at the end of the Conservative Party's road. I think they've been in government too long. I think they lack some ideas that will bind them together. It's not just personalities, and I think we're heading for an election. But probably not straight away, because that's the way our system works. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas.
But the Conservatives say they've got plenty of ideas. It's just that those ideas can't be heard, can't be seen amongst the chaos that we've had over the last few weeks. Would you accept that there are ideas, but they're just not able to? I mean, Liz Truss obviously talks about delivery a lot, but actually delivering those ideas isn't easy to do when there's such disagreement within the party.
Well, the whole concept of trickle-down economics has been shown, which is what her
the top-down
was based on, has been shown not to work. You know, these are tired ideas. You know, the ideas that she's taking from Margaret Thatcher from 30 years ago, a woman who was ousted from her own, you know, when she was Prime Minister, you know, by her own party. You know, these ideas are not the ideas that we need for the current moment. We're facing, for example, a climate crisis. And you know, simply talking about growth without thinking about the implications of the growth for the planet. These are not ideas that are going to kind of, you know, stand the test of reality.
Do you think when a party has been in power for several electoral cycles that it becomes more difficult to maintain discipline or not? Is there something about that situation where you have a party that's been in power for a long time?
Absolutely. I think that, but they also run out of steam, and I think that's one of the things that's happening here. I think
there are lots of, you know, newer MPs, though, aren't there, as well as the MPs who've been around for a long time with, you know, energy, ideas, and so on.
Yeah, there are, but it's true. But you know, what we've seen actually is a long fight over our relationship with Europe, which started with Margaret Thatcher being ousted, and you know, moved on to Boris Johnson kicking out a great number of MPs from his own party, a lot of very talented, experienced people. And now we're in a situation where the Conservatives are trying to make Brexit work, and they're running out of ideas how to do that. So I think sometimes what parties need is they need a time of quiet reflection to kind of rethink, renew, and find where the real sources of talent lie. And when they're in opposition, which will happen, you know, sometime quite soon, then that's what they'll have to do.
Well, obviously they're here for the fight. They want to win the next election. Do you think that there are people within the party who can bring that unity, that calm that's needed, and the space to actually get on with trying to do the job that, you know, they were voted in to do with a great majority at the last election?
I think that, you know, the obvious candidate is Rishi Sunak. He came second in the leadership contest. He commanded the support of MPs. I think trying to find a candidate that works for everybody is going to be very difficult. But if you can find a candidate who's competent and who's prepared to bring in lots of people from across the spectrum of opinion in his own party or her party, then they could make it work for a while. But I actually think that their days are numbered.
Caroline Slowcock, thank you very much for your thoughts today. We will be back here very, very soon, getting you right up to date with what's going on. Just a reminder that there is an urgent question in about 40 minutes' time. That's been granted to Labour. They're asking the new Home Secretary, as of yesterday, Grant Shapps, to tell Parliament more about the departure of his predecessor, Suella Braverman. For the moment, back to you, Martine.
Anita, thank you very much. Well, some other news now this morning, and a decline in the traditional GP-patient relationship is putting people's health at risk, according to a report by MPs. The Health and Social Care Committee said seeing your GP should not be like booking an Uber driver, and it's called for more to be done to ensure that patients see the same doctor. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson reports.
So last time we were talking about something you had a sore in your mouth and we sent you for a chest x-ray, didn't we?
84-year-old Rob Herden has come to see his GP because of a mouth condition. And it is his GP. The practice here aims to ensure patients see the same doctor each time.
Well done.
It's easy for me because I can feel relaxed when I come in, and I know that the doctor that I'm seeing, or my local doctor that I'm seeing on a regular basis, knows me, and that gives me the assurance that our doctors can be straight with us, they can be like a friend.
What I'm going to suggest we do is refer you to see the oral mouth specialist. So
Dr. Jacob Lee has what's known as a personal list of patients. A tiny fraction of GPs in England have these. He looks after around 400 families.
And sometimes what they want to do is to take a little biopsy. Of those 400, we will see about 30% really regularly, but I will know probably up to 70% of the patients on my list, and I will, out of each family, I'll know somebody in there. When we see a patient for 10 or 15 minutes in an appointment, having continuity means that it's not just 10 or 15 minutes on its own. These are 10 or 15 minutes that mount up, so actually over a year you might see them for an hour, and over 2 years you might see them for a few hours, and it's this building an understanding about a patient, and the patient builds an understanding about you and how you're going to support them.
Surgeries like this, where doctors and patients tend to know each other, don't just feel better, but evidence suggests they are better. A recent major study from Norway has shown a reduction in hospital emergency admissions and also deaths of up to 30%. Today's report from MPs is urging ministers to prioritise continuity of care where GPs see the same patients. It wants NHS England to reintroduce personal lists for doctors and to require practices to report on progress. The report says without changes like these and others, patient safety is being put at risk, and doctors agree.
No doubt at all it's a crisis. Some practices are remarkably managing to cope, but most practices are really struggling. They're on a knife edge of not just being able to provide high quality personal care, but actually even being able to provide safe care.
The government says it's improving GP services with same-day appointments for those in need and no waits longer than 2 weeks. But MPs have said those measures don't go far enough. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News, Bristol.
Rail workers on strike will be forced to maintain a minimum level of service during industrial action under new rules being proposed by the government. It'll mean that a minimum number of trains would still run on strike days, a move criticised by unions as being autocratic. It comes as thousands of workers from Royal Mail, BT and Openreach walk out today in a row over pay and conditions. Energy use is being restricted across Ukraine today for the first time since the start of the Russian invasion. The planned power cuts are a result of Russian drone and missile attacks on the country's energy infrastructure. People have been urged to charge mobile appliances and power banks and make sure they have batteries for torches. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse is set to publish its final report later. It spent 7 years examining how institutions in England and Wales responded to sexual abuse dating back to the 1950s. The report is expected to focus on whether there should be a new law requiring people working with children to report any suspicions of abuse. One of the most iconic paintings of 20th century British art, L.S. Lowry's Going to the Match, has been sold for £7.8 million, a new auction record for the artist. The 1953 artwork features Lowry's emblematic stick figures set in an industrial landscape of northwest England. In this case, a crowd of people heading to a football match in Bolton. It was bought by the Lowry Arts Centre in Salford, which means the painting will remain in Britain and accessible to the public. Let's take a look at the weather forecast now with Matt.
Hello. Well, it's been a pretty wet day for some of you so far. Through this afternoon, though, the rain becomes more confined to northern and eastern areas. That means to the south and west, things will continue to brighten up with some sunshine. Common theme, though, for just about all is how mild it is. Why? Well, we've got low pressure down towards the southwest of us, winds flowing around that anti-clockwise, dragging that warm air from the south, but pushing the weather fronts further northwards as we go through the day. So the rain will become pretty relentless this afternoon in parts of northeast England, southeast Scotland in particular. Still some heavy downpours east Anglia, the southeast, but overall drier for some of you compared with the morning, bit brighter too. It's southwest England, Wales and Northern Ireland where compared with yesterday there's a lot more sunshine around, lighter winds, it will feel warmer. Cool day in northern Scotland though, thanks to that brisk southeasterly wind. But where you've got the sunshine in the south, we'll see temperatures 17, 18, maybe 19 degrees. So as you finish the day, wet end and evening rush hour across parts of northeast England, eastern Scotland. That rain pushes a bit further northwards across Scotland overnight, fizzling a little bit. So mist and fog becoming an issue through some parts of central eastern England to take us into tomorrow morning's commute. But any early fog, Wales, the southwest will clear. The breeze picks up here and we'll see some showers to take us into Friday morning. A mild start once again, low pressure still to the west of us, southerly winds by and large, but with these weather fronts starting to push their way in, it's going to be a change of fortunes. Eastern areas, away from northern Scotland that is, will be a bit dry and bright compared with today. Western areas, greater chance of some heavy and thundery showers at times. Still some sunnier moments here, but a windier day, winds 40, 50 miles an hour at times across Wales and the southwest, and a bit blustery across the eastern parts of England. Lightest winds will be across some parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures here actually up a little bit with some brighter conditions into the afternoon. Shetland though wet and cool. A warmer day towards East Anglia and the southeast, 19-20 Celsius possible. Another mild night then to take us into Saturday, start of the weekend. Saturday actually probably the drier of the 2 days for many of you, although Scotland, Northern Ireland seen a bit more cloud, some outbreaks of rain and showers again will focus across parts of Wales and southern England, some heavy and thundery. For a few of you though, it will stay dry across the central swathe of the UK with some sunshine. But as you go into Sunday, as another area of low pressure creeps its way in with weather fronts, the breeze will pick up and there'll be more in the way of rain around to take us to the second half of the weekend. Bye for now.